This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 67 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by Ramona Shelburne from ESPN, senior NBA writer, one of the best long-form writers in sports. She's a panelist on NBA Today and Around the Horn. She is also now a former colleague of Adrian Wojnarowski.
Whoa.
Ramona, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. So when did you find out that Woj was going to
when you did
leave? Yeah.
I think he had hoped to tell a couple of us before that announcement went out, but then it started to get around. It was like, well, you know what, like every news story, once you tell one person or two people, it starts to get around, and then it started to get around, and he, you lose control of the story. And so I think, he made the right call there, because I talked to him later that day. He said, "I'm sorry, I was going to call you," but I was really bummed. I'm really bummed. Like I don't know. It was interesting because he and I worked so closely together, and we have very complementary roles, right? Like he was in the lead, chair for news breaking, but we all are in constant communication. And so it's like now when I hear something, I'm like, I like, who am I going to call? I miss calling him. Right. Obviously I call Brian Windhorst all the time, and Tim Bontemps and I don't know, maybe I call Bobby Marks more than anybody. Bobby Marks is like, he's the secret sauce of our place. I don't know if everybody knows how good Bobby is at everything. And like the greatest teammate ever. I mean, he sends us he publishes this stuff. It's out there for everyone to read. If you need to know how to go be an NBA insider, just read Bobby Marks's off-season forecast, and it'll tell you everyone that you should go try to break and everything you should go try to call on and stuff like that. But I think what was interesting with it was like how, obviously Woj bombs land all the time on NBA news and notes, right? But when it was with him, it was a big one, right?
Yeah.
How did it land with you?
Yeah, no, it definitely it hit different. It was certainly, when I read it first, I thought it was a fake account. I didn't think it was coming directly from him.
I did too, because you know what? I didn't see
double checked that. Yeah. And then
I didn't see his post. I saw Passan. Saw Passan saying he's going to be at St. Bonaventure, and I was like, wait, what? I'm sorry. And then I went back and I saw the original. I was like, oh, it's a whole thing. Okay. Wow.
What was that conversation like when you spoke to him later in the day?
It was literally within a couple hours. Like I texted him first. His phone was off because he had to keep it off at that point. But he called me, and I dropped everything. And I was like, oh my God, dude. It was he said all the things we would say, and we resolved to go have much a longer conversation in the future. But I was sad more than anything, but I was really happy for him and his wife, because I feel like he's running towards something. And it's something that I think I can say this now. Like he recruited me once when he was at Yahoo. He was building the vertical out, and he tried to go recruit me to come work with him. And I was really tempted because of him. Like I didn't want to leave ESPN. I'm ESPN. It's the biggest platform in sports. I appreciate everything I've gotten since I joined ESPN, and you don't walk away from that lightly. But Woj was calling, and he's like, I took his call, and he was the draw, right? Like just seeing how hard somebody works, like how he did what he did. Like I feel like I've had a front row seat to see how the greatest newsbreaker in NBA history has done his job. It's just like, it's unbelievable to peek behind that curtain and to see how that guy's wired and still maintain a humanity to him. Like it's like, I don't know how he did that for as long as he did to maintain a humanity. I know he certainly didn't sleep that much, but he still is a human. And
right.
That's really amazing that he was able to do that. And so good for you, man. Good for Adrian, good for his kids, good for his wife, Amy. I've gotten to know her over the years too. We hang out when she comes to LA with him. And I just think like, that's a pretty baller move to just walk away at the top of your game. Right.
Yeah.
Walk away on, you're the king, man. You just like left the Iron Throne. It was it was pretty amazing. And so like on the one hand, for like a couple of hours, I was processing what that meant. I was thinking like, oh, okay, wait, but I got to make sure that we have this Joel Embiid extension. I gotta make sure that we don't lose any news that he might have been working on. Jump into the fray, call our mutual, like call a lot of the people who like we both call a lot of the same people. I have different areas where I'm strong. He has a lot of areas where he's strong, but there's a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram. And now I gotta make sure those people don't leave, right? Like, hey, we still gotta do the business. And so, and then I got, call people on staff. And like it was a lot at once. And I had a couple stories due too. So I was trying to, I remember the night I had a story that I had carved out the rest of the day to work on my story. And it was like, oh boy, there goes that day. Like I had a WeWork office booked, and I was going to like write the rest of the day. And then I was like, I'm not getting to that until tonight. And so I think I stayed up till 2:30 in the morning that night writing because I had to wait for the kids to go to bed and then I could focus and stay up and crank something out. And, but I was really like really scattered because it was such a, he was such a leader and he was such a hard worker that we have to just all, process this, reorient, and make sure that we do the job. Like we're the worldwide leader. We gotta lead.
Yeah, it's one thing to walk away, but like you said, to walk away at the top of your game like that, especially in a business where, I mean, everybody in this business undoubtedly has an ego. So to kind of forego that for what he perceives is going to be a better work-life balance, it's still that's a lot to give that up.
I didn't think he would really do it. Like we would talk about what we would do after, our careers are done. Like if we ever stopped doing this, we would have those conversations. And I was like, well, I can't really not work. I have 2 kids to put through college. You're already putting your kids through college, man. Like I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. Okay. So we're in different places in our financial lives. Not to mention he made a lot more than us, but okay. But like he's like we always bonded because he's a newspaper guy at heart. Like he always tells me the stories from Waterbury, Connecticut, and the Fresno Bee, and the Bergen Record, and and like I came from the LA Daily News where we were just like scrappy, ink stained wretches, right? And like we both have stories of covering high school sports of like you cover a basketball game late at night and you're working on it in the coach's office. And back in the dark ages, we used to like go on AOL dial-up and use a fax machine in the coach's office, like writing the story. And then sometimes you get locked in and you have to hop a fence to get out. I mean, we both have like all these that background. That's why we always bonded, because we had this scrappy newspaper background. And so like people that I work with, I mean, Brian Windhorst and I still have that. Tim Bontemps has that. Bobby Marks obviously is one of my closest guys at ESPN, but he didn't come from newspapers. He came from the front office. But I always, Adrian and I were close as colleagues, but also because we had this shared background of just being grinders. Like you work your way up, like you eat what you kill. Like you just, like nothing is handed to you. You don't expect anything. You're just scrappy and you keep going. And he was, I mean, for him to come from where he came from to become the king,
right,
dude, amazing. And also then to be able to like leave it behind, like that's where you can see that he was still a human being. Like if he was just all consumed by the job and could never let it go or whatever it is, like that's unhealthy. And people get like that in these jobs, these high pressure jobs and these glory jobs and the ones that pay a lot of money. Same, you see it with athletes who can't walk away, that they don't know how to be anything other than, and my mind goes to the Gavin DeGraw lyric, anything other than what I've been trying to be lately, right? But they don't know how to be anything other than the star athlete and living that life and important and famous. And then retirement is this huge transition. But that's something and I think it's the reason Adrian was really good at his job, is that he was a human being. He built real relationships with so many people all around the NBA. It was kind of fun for both of us because we did have a lot of relationships with the same people, but like he has more of that East Coast background and I have a West Coast background. And so the people that I knew from like the Wayback Machine and people in his Wayback Machine are like different people, right? Like he knew a lot more about David Stern than I did because he was from New York and he knew all that. Whereas I knew more about Jerry Buss and Elgin Baylor and those. And it was just like fun to see where our paths intersected. And the only person who has better stories than him from the past, probably of just like the history of the NBA and the whole last 30 years of the NBA. The only person is I think Jackie McMullen. I think Jackie's probably got the best stories ever because she's covered the Lakers and the Celtics and the Charles Barkley and like that amazing era because she goes a little way further back than Adrian even did. My favorite thing ever was when Jackie and Adrian were in town, and it was just like we all just sat there and shut up, let them go. So great.
He's only 55. Would you be shocked if Woj takes some time to reset here and finds his way back to media at some point?
No. A lot of other people will say yes, like, oh, he's really gone, he's out. He's the guy, Tim Robbins in Shawshank Redemption on the beach and say Watanabe. Maybe. I hope that's the case, but I also wouldn't be sad I would be happy if he came back to it a few years. I don't know. Whatever role he wants. Like if he wants to go write books, I could see that. I could see him come back as a columnist at the Bergen Record. I could see him do anything he wanted to do. Wouldn't shock me if I don't think he'll come back and be Adrian Wojnarowski and drop Woj bombs every day and do that life.
Yeah.
But I could definitely see him having something left to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Do you think should NBA fans still follow Woj on social media? And what I mean, like could he still drop a Woj bomb every so often because he still has the contacts? But would that be viewed as almost like stepping on toes?
No, I think I don't think he's gonna do that. I don't think people are gonna call him and get him to break. Like, I mean, there's even been a couple things literally, like this wasn't Joe Biden handing off to Kamala. This wasn't like all teed up, It was like done, and then we're all like, oh, what are we doing? And so we're all making sure that we're reconnoitering and talking. We got a lot of group texts going right now because it's a busy time. Camps are opening up. And I don't think, so anyway, that was a long way of me saying, I actually did circle back with Adrian on something because I knew it was something he was working on. And I was like, hey, do you want to contribute a tag? And he was like, no, I'm retired, and so I think in the meantime, I don't think he wants to say to break news or do any of that. If it comes to him, I don't know what he'll do. Well, that'll be like that first temptation, but I really think he's excited about what he's doing now at St. Bonnie's. Like I really do. He was on the phone doing his new job already. Like he was already like really into it. And so this isn't like the beach to say what's an Aho. This is like he's running towards something. And that's something he told me when he recruited me. He was like, look, when you're making a decision about your life and your career, you got to be running towards something. You don't want to be like talking yourself into it. You don't want to be, 51-49. You don't want to be making pros and cons. Like you want to be running towards something. So if you're not running towards it, don't. And I think he's running towards what he's doing now. He's not running away from ESPN. He's running towards, being the NIL coordinator and GM at St. Bonnie's. Like that's a place he really loves. And I think he's sinking his teeth into that. But let's check back in a couple of years and see if he's got a book coming out or something. I don't know.
What, when was it that he recruited you? Like what was the timing for him recruiting you and then him getting to ESPN and joining you there?
I want to say, I can't remember the year, 2014, 15-ish, 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
So he was still at Yahoo for a few more years after that.
Yeah.
He was just launching the vertical, and it was, he wanted to assemble a dream team. He was like, I'm going to be the newsbreaker. We got Bobby Marks. We got Jonathan Gavoni. He had this, I think he had Chris Mannix at the time. He had Shams at the time. And he's like, I want you to join our team. You're one of the best long form writers in the country. And I love what you do. And you break news. And I think we'd be an amazing team. And he's like, you can carve out the job you want. He's like, you want to cover the Olympics? You cover the Olympics. He was an amazing recruiter. And I wasn't drawn by any of that. I was just drawn because it was him, because I had a tremendous amount of respect for him. It was interesting to like go through that process because it made me evaluate what I wanted to do, It was really hard saying no to him. I remember calling him saying I'm going to stay. And he was nice about it. He was like, thanks for the consideration. I really appreciate that. And was honored that you even took my call. And I was like, of course I'll take your call. But it was a really, it was just like, that's when I knew, that's when I first got to know him. I mean, I think we had crossed paths before. We had, I'd seen him on the road or something, but he was just always working. Like there was never any Cold War. There was never any back and forth. Like it was never, like people like to talk about all the back and forth on Twitter and social media and the rivalries and this and that. Like, it's just like, Woj would always say this to me. He's like, I don't have time for that. I got to get the news out. And he's right. I mean, it's true. Like if you're a serious person and you're doing your job right, you don't have time for that stuff. So that's why when we first actually got to know each other, we were still competitors and we were nice. But then I think I said no to him. We still went back to competing, like we went back to me and we were friendly, but it was different.
Did he, when he came to ESPN, was it Woj joining a team at ESPN, or did he have a role in crafting that team?
Well, I think he brought a lot of his people over too, right? I mean, that's one of the things I really respected about how he came over. He had built the vertical. He had recruited those people to work for him. And then when ESPN, signed him, he made sure he didn't leave people high and dry. Like everybody had I think Bobby came, who else? Gavoni came. I'm racking my brain for all the people who came at that time. And I think Nick DePaula came also. Shams didn't. Chris Mannix didn't. I'm trying to think of who else there was, but I think he made sure that people were taken care of. Mark Spears had already gotten here. Michael Lee didn't. I think there was an option though. Like I remember, at least that's the way I've always perceived it. And I respected that because I remember like when you recruit someone to come work for you, like he was the GM of that. And he knew people were taking a chance on them. And then, he didn't leave his people behind. I respected that. That showed me a lot about his character because other people don't do that. They just, they recruit you and then they leave and then it's like, sorry, you're on your own now. We've all seen that in this industry. And some people that doesn't end well for them afterwards. And they gave up a good job to take that. And so I thought he was a good person throughout that. And I will always say that about him. Like he, like if I needed to call him about life stuff, like I've had, when I called him and told him I was having another kid or my first kid, and I called him I was having my second kid. I called, when my father passed away last year, like he would drop what he was doing to talk to you about your life and real stuff and not just NBA news and notes, like he could put that aside and be a person real fast. And I don't think people get that because they just see the Twitter stuff.
Yeah. Did he change the news breaking industry?
Oh, yeah. Our modern news landscape was built by him. Like especially in the NBA. Like, I remember it was so funny. Like I was thinking about how things used to be. Like there were stories that he broke when he was at Yahoo that I wasn't even aware that he broke because we didn't have, it wasn't the alert culture. It wasn't I don't even think it was on Twitter. I think he just sent it as a story.
Yeah.
I think he told me when I was doing the Sterling podcast, that was when Donald Sterling was banned from the NBA. And I did this, I did the 30 for 30 on that back in 2019. I was covering it at the time. And I remember we would just wait for his stories. I don't remember waiting for like Twitter alerts. And he told me later on, he goes, I broke that Silver was going to suspend him for life. I'm like, you did? I didn't even know that because that was 2014 and we weren't just like so hooked on Twitter for our news. Like that's not always where it came from. He must have tweeted it while I was standing outside doing a live shot, but it was like not even something that we noticed. I don't know if he broke it by 5 minutes or 10. I mean, I had to go back and find the story, but now it's like everything is like, I used to think that I had, like you get a story and it took me a long time to figure out how to do this. Like you get a free agent signing or a trade or whatever it is. And like, you're trying to send it into the news desk first. Cause we have to send it in first and let them know it's coming. and then you're trying to put the tweet out, and like I'm on my phone and you have stupid autocorrect and stuff, especially if it's like a name that's hard to spell. And like I'd constantly be like typing the name out, and the autocorrect is just screwing it up. And then I'd see his alert come through, and I'm like, damn it, just freaking hard name to spell. And the autocorrect, and I was like, I had that one, I just didn't do it fast enough, and then I was like, I realized, oh, he was better than me at this, because he would get it ready to go in the tweet. Like, so the name was already ready, because he knew while you're waiting on the call, get it ready. And then when you get the call, like, oh, it's done. And you have and you write out like, you don't have to waste your time. You fill in, the details, they figure, done something. I was like, oh God, my stupid fat fingers or something, like, and it was like, and he was just like amazing at that. And I just think like we've gotten to this place where, the news happens so fast. Like you have to just be doing this and be ready at your computer and have it ready and anticipate everything all the time. I used to I'd be driving, and I always remember Woj telling me how this, like, I'd be driving on the freeway and he's like, that commute kills you. You get stuff while you're driving, and then the time it takes you to pull over to tweet, and he had the same thing with flights. He always used to take red eyes or early morning. He didn't like to take any flights during the day because he didn't want to miss anything. Like, I mean, but that's how committed he was to the job and to making sure he didn't miss anything. Like the worst thing ever, you and I, when we don't have Wi-Fi working on the plane, we're like, shit, the Wi-Fi's not working.
Right.
He's like, I'm not taking the flight.
Yeah.
I'm not, if I don't have Wi-Fi, then I'm not going to miss the story. Like in this 5 hours that I'm on the flight, like people say, do you sleep on the flight? No. How could he sleep on the flight? He might miss something.
Yeah.
And like the level of commitment, the level of, and it's not just commitment to all of that. It's making those calls and making sure that you're there and that you understand everything that's going on and that you're not wrong and that you have the full story and you understand what went into the whole process. Like there's so many people who can get one call from an agent and they get spun on something or a team or whatever, and they're waiting for that. And then they just tweet whatever somebody says to them. Like Woj would never do that. He would never get spun by one source because the person knows they don't have the sourcing level to get the other side or the third side or the full context. Like that's why he was so good at the job, because he always had sourcing everywhere. And you couldn't spin him. Like he knew before you even say, right. He knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's like people, people focus so much on the Twitter and the this and the that, but it's that level of insight of reporting, that deep reporting that goes into so much of what he does, that like, I want him to be retired and do what he's doing. But like, I just, having worked with him as when I do a narrative TikToks or we do something after the fact, and I just know how much he knows and I know how hard he worked and he has all the stories and all that. Like, if you ever wanted to write a book one day or some of the great things that he's done, like you should read it because you'll have time to really sink in and do it.
Does journalism and media put too much emphasis on breaking news at times?
I think that's Twitter. I think that's one element of our audience. And I understand your question. And I've often, thought about this a lot myself, like, the alerts, the alert, the issues with fat fingers and autocorrect and, whatever you have, right? That is one form of news. Like obviously transactional news is really important, trades, et cetera, free agent signings. But what I've tried to do in my career is write about stories that matter, that are going to cut through. Like if it's a hard story, if it's something like, you got to get somebody to talk to you. You got to find out what really happened, what happened behind the scenes, like big stuff. Like that's the stuff that I try to put my attention on. And it's, and in every story I write, like I want it to be chock full of things that somebody reading might aggregate and pull out and make into a whole story. And, whatever it is, there should be 10 stories that come off of any one story I do. Right. And I think, I know that's Twitter. Okay. I know people get consumed by it and the social media part of it, but I also know, and I don't have a full picture of like how many people read every story, but I get a sense from, what stories do well, what stories cut through, what stories like people call me and say, "Oh, that was great that you just did." Oh, I'm glad you wrote that. Now I understand. And even on our side on ESPN, like my bosses have told me those stories are extremely valuable to us.
Sure.
Like that kind of news, that character driven news, narrative, like that stuff, that it's how this happened and why it happened. And let me take you behind the scenes. Let me take you behind the curtain. All the process stories that you do of like why something's about to happen or could happen. Those stories are really important. And not even to mention, like, I'm one of those people. I read everything Bobby Marks does. I think what he does is so like, if you don't know what's going on in the league, just sit there for a half hour and read a Bobby Marks breakdown or a Kevin Pelton breakdown. But you read Zach Lowe, or you listen to his podcast, or you listen to the Hoop Collective, and it's amazing how much insight those guys all have into what's going on in the NBA and everything that needs to be. It's fun. Like, when you listen to those podcasts, like, those guys have fun, but it's also interesting and wonky and nerdy, and there's stories that carry, like, people want to hear about what that assistant coach is like and what they said, or who's, all what lies ahead. And so, yeah, Twitter's one area. And I think that matters, but I also think there's so much else that matters too. And I deal with my colleagues all the time. Like, I'm as I'm talking to you, I missed a call from Bontemps, and I missed a call from Windhorst, and I've missed a call from, we talk all day long about anticipating what we need to be on and what we need to be writing about and what we need to be doing. And so I think, Twitter, I think is one segment of the population that you need to take seriously. But I, as Woj would tell me, like, I don't have time to get into the muck of that. I don't respond like that. I don't get into the muck because we got stories to write. We got shows to do. We got podcasts to produce that are good.
You mentioned being in touch with like the entire NBA team at ESPN, and especially now trying to figure out what's next without Woj. Is that a position or role that appeals to you at all?
The Woj role,
yeah,
he is, I would say he's irreplaceable. I would say that there's no one for one. There's like right now it's a community.
There's not just like a Woj Rolodex that they
you don't just, it's not, person. It's not like, it's like, I don't know how anybody could do what Woj does, but I think there's a lot of really talented people in our staff. And I think that, I'm going to jump into the fray right now of like making sure, while we all catch our breath. And so I know Bontemps is and Windhorst, we're all calling each other right now and saying, like, let's hold it down until we figure out what we're going to do. Cause it's, it's not like we planned anything, right? Like, this was, we all found out on Twitter. I think maybe internally it was not a long heads up. I don't think there's been a planning phase. So everybody's just figuring it out and just making sure that we do our jobs right now. And I think it's, I know my lane. I know what I do really well. I know what they value me for, and I know that news also really matters. And so I'm going to keep doing what I do, but I'm also right now, especially, we're jumping into that news fray and making sure that we do our jobs. Like, what do we do? We're the worldwide leader. We got to lead. And I've always had that ever since I got to ESPN. Like, as soon as I got there at the Daily News, like, I came from the Daily News. One of my first things, we jumped in like right around Christmas time, and it was like Pete Carroll just left USC, and it was a general news site at the time. It was like more of a, like, we covered everything almost like the LA Times or the LA Daily News, and Pete Carroll left USC, and I had been a general columnist at the Daily News, and I was like, well, we got to do a coaching search. We got to do that. I know some people at SC, and I know college football a little bit, and I didn't know any of I knew Joe Shad, I think, was our college reporter back then. And, but I didn't really know him. And so I was like, this is ESPN LA. We've got to have some stuff, and I got to just jump into the fray. We got to do it. And so it reminds me a little of that period of time. We've had a couple transition periods that remind me of this right now, where like when right before Woj got hired, I think there was like a couple week gap before he was hired before he started. And I remember Windhorst and I were I think I just sat in the chair for weeks on end doing news. There's that funny video where Brian's spinning by me. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
Yeah.
That was back right before free agency that year. And he and I just did, we just sat in the chair all day long doing those news hits. But I know, there's a point where I get out of the news chair and I go write my grand narrative, and I go write those stories that really cut through on the how and the why and pulling back the curtain. And so there's this point where, like, I remember getting up from that chair and Woj took over, and it was like he could start at July 1st. I remember it was like literally midnight. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that night. It was literally midnight, and he was not even allowed to talk to us until midnight. Do that, but it was like as soon as he's on the clock, okay, and there he goes out of the gates. And it was, I think this is a similar kind of transition period, but in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever it takes, like we'll figure out the new order. But I think you're calling me on I don't know when you post this, but this is the first week after the big giant Woj bomb, right?
Yeah.
And so my thought today was, one, we did a nice job celebrating him on TV. He did a nice job with his post. But this is my friend. This is my colleague. Like, I think he should get I want people to know him and know what he was really like. And I also think that maybe me saying, I hope he writes a book one day or doing all that. That's me saying that. That's not coming from him.
Sure.
I do hope he gets in I hope he gets in the Hall of Fame one day. I hope that should happen now, tomorrow, whatever that is. But he deserves all the flowers right now. And I think, like, to know, I was one of the privileged few, as I wrote in my tweet afterwards. It took me a minute to compose that. I knew what it took to be him. And that's the feeling I got from the call that I had that day. Like, he said, what he reminded me of, like, an athlete who says stuff like, I know what it takes for me to perform at the level I do. And if I can't put that in, if I can't do all of that, then I don't want to do it. And I think he could have done this job for another 10 years if he wanted to.
Yeah.
But I think he was running towards something else. And I think he really felt like if he was in like 5% less or 7% less, then don't do it. If you're not going to do it at the level it takes to respect the game, right? Then don't do it.
Sure. I know you mentioned that Woj couldn't be wasn't going to be used by any team or agent or anything like that. But while it wasn't the last Woj bomb, but one of the last big stories Woj was on was the Danny Hurley to the Lakers story.
Yeah.
What was, as being somebody in LA who has covered the team, what was your read on the Lakers' interest in both JJ Redick and Danny Hurley at the time? Just because Shams.
No, I'm glad you asked me this.
Yeah.
I don't understand why there's any theories about this. The Lakers tried to hire Danny Hurley. They offered him the job. There was a real offer. If you want to act like, I know that people have their theories, but like, it was a very small circle. And I know from Lakerland how small the circle is and why it was so small, because they were doing something like this. Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't tell anybody when you're doing something really big. You keep the circle super tight. And so they had the perfect stalking horse, which was JJ Redick was not available really until he finished, he's going to finish the finals for ESPN. He was obviously somebody they were interested in, but they were going to take their time thinking about other candidates, thinking about other ideas. Obviously, Coach K was involved. He has a really strong relationship with both those guys. And they very surreptitiously made contact with Danny Hurley and offered him the job, tried to get him to sign it, tried to woo him away from Connecticut, much like they did, by the way, with Mike Krzyzewski a few cycles ago. They really tried several times with Coach K. I remember that Kobe was always pushing that. Kobe was very close to Coach K and always wanted him and told Dr. Buss to go get him. And they tried, and he just wasn't ready to leave the college game, but they definitely tried. And a lot of times that stuff didn't get out either. They tried a couple times, I think, with Calipari too. This isn't like that surprising of a Laker move, because they have tried to hire college coaches in the past. They just haven't pulled it off. And so, like, I just thought Adrian was in front of this one, and he just happened to be very well positioned on this story. He obviously, lives in Connecticut, knows Hurley from the from covering him all those years. I think, the book, etc. But it's, but I don't understand why there's like, they offered him the job. Like,
Yeah.
and like, and even JJ, who I remember at the time, he goes, I understood. Like, it's Hurley. Like, I mean, I don't have that resume. I don't have that background. I don't have that whole thing. And so I know, I just don't, I didn't understand that one at all. I didn't understand why. I mean, sometimes everybody gets surprised, just like I just got surprised by the Woj retiring. Like we
Sure.
all, he would say stuff. Maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. But I never believed him because he's just so good at what he did. I was like, yeah, just call me in October. Let's see how you would feel. You just need to go on vacation, go away with your kids and your wife. You'll come back with a head of steam, And I think he just didn't. I think he got to Labor Day and he wasn't running towards it again. He didn't have the same steam that he did. And so he was running towards something else. Like that's what happens sometimes. People are human and they make decisions in real time.
I know we have a little less than 10 minutes left.
Sure.
I want to ask a couple of questions about your career first.
Yeah.
What, how did you end up on the Donald Sterling beat? Like, was that something,
Yeah.
was that the opportunity to cover something that had the potential to kind of go outside the realm of sports? Was that interesting to you, or would you have rather at the time just been covering playoff basketball?
No, it's a good question. So I started, it was kind of like an interesting time for me because we had started at ESPN Los Angeles, which was a local site.
Yep.
And then at some point the local sites were going away. And we were all based in LA, and I had established myself a bit doing news with the Lakers and the Clippers, but I was not a national reporter yet. I was just still kind of building up my source database. I didn't see it as like this was an imperative that I do this or I'm not going to have a job, but I knew I was going to have to make some kind of a pivot. And there was a lot of reporters in LA at the time, and so I didn't know. I was trying to go at the time, like to go cover other playoff series. I had covered some Oklahoma City Thunder. I covered the Grizzlies. I went to Denver. I went to Portland, and I got this feeling like, I got a lot of work to do building up my source network. I'm building up my national profile, and not just profile, but just making sure I can do the job. Like you can want to be a national reporter, but you got to figure that out. So every time I cover a playoff series, I try to dig in and write features with on players on those teams and with those executives. So I was just like in that mode, like let's expand out of LA and not just be Lakers Clippers girl, because we don't have ESPN LA anymore. I gotta make myself valuable elsewhere. And so I happen to be very well positioned on this story because the Clippers were kind of the first beat I ever covered. I was at the Daily News at the time, and it wasn't even my beat. It was just our beat writer left. And I said, can I do that? And they said, well, if it doesn't interfere with your responsibilities as a high school sports writer, go ahead. I go, really? Like, and they go, well, we're not going to send you on the road really, but if you want to cover the home games or practices, and you can still make your high school football game at night, cool. And I was like, yeah, I'm excited. I mean, I was in my 20s. I was excited. So I'd be like covering a high school baseball game and like rushing down to Staples Center to catch the game and, to catch a game downtown. But so that was one of the first things I ever covered. And that was the year Baron Davis signed with the Clippers.
Okay.
And they were sort of a newsy team, and I started to get to know the NBA a little bit. And I knew a lot of the people in the building. Like I just knew, the team president and the GMs and all the trainers and the people, like all the support staff. Right. And so I just knew the people who had worked there. And when that story came up, it felt like a news story. That night I was in Portland covering the Trailblazers and the Rockets in a playoff game. And then the alert went out, and the desk said, what do we have on that? And I think I was also keeping track of the Lakers because I think they were close to firing Mike D'Antoni. And I was like,
okay.
I think I was waiting to see when, how, if they did it. I think that was happening right in and around then. So I was very much like plugged into news, but while I was also covering while I was covering the game, and that came out, and I was like, oh my God, like I can't believe what he said. And it was like all hands on deck. It was kind of like I had to write my column from that game. Remember Kevin McHale was the coach, and I was trying to write some Rockets column, and then I had to pivot and just jump in on the news side of this Clipper thing. And think I stayed in Portland another day. We were just trying to figure out what was going to happen next. We were like, well, what can the NBA do? What's the Constitution? We were trying to get a copy of the NBA Constitution. We were like, I wasn't in the Bay Area. I think Mark Spears was there, and maybe Arash Markazi was there covering the Clippers for us at the time. And they were on scene writing those newsers, but I just felt like it was a big league story. And I had a choice of like, should I go back on this Trailblazers series or should I go back to LA? And I went back to LA because it felt like this was going to be a big thing for a while. Yeah. And then they assigned me to write a story. It was like, can you do something like we call them a TikTok. It's like, it's sort of like what SI used to do. It's like, we're going to take a day or two after a big news event or the team wins a championship and take you behind the scenes with people on the record and narrative and all the sourcing of like what really happened and why it happened and et cetera. And my editor at the time was Eric Neal. And Eric said, can you turn this before game 5 or can you turn it after game 5, whatever it was. And I think I just did the first, 4 days after 4 days that changed the NBA. And that was like the wildest 4 days. Like it was so crazy. Like from the players deciding whether to boycott and then figuring out why this all happened in the first place. Like I think I got hold of the lawsuit that Shelley Sterling had filed against Vistiviano. And I figured out why the tapes leaked and what the pressure point was that, Shelley was suing her and she was trying to get her to drop the lawsuit. It was just it was just such a great story. It was like, you couldn't make this stuff up. And as I was covering it, like I remember standing out front of Donald Sterling's house in Beverly Hills. He lives across the street from the Beverly Hills Hotel. And I had to find out where he lived. Like, I think I asked some agent or two who had been to his house, like, hey, where does he live? And they told me. And I was standing out there with like news reporters. And, I used to intern at KNBC, which is like the NBC affiliate here. And my friend was Beverly White. She used to let me tag along on ride-alongs with her and stuff. And she was outside of Sterling's house. And I was covering it from like the NBA news and notes, and she was covering it from like a NBC News, like nightly, like I think I started to realize like, this is a really big story. Like, this isn't just, a little bit of, this isn't just going to go away in a day. This is going to keep being a huge, giant story. And so I think, and they just wanted me to stay on it. Like, I wanted to stay on it, but also my editors, they just kept saying, like, I wrote that one big story and then they said, okay, now stay on it and do what's next. Go to New York, go cover the sale and how are they going to force the sale and how are they going to do it. And so they gave me time and space, and I spent the playoffs. I went to New York. I met with the Heat. I met with the NBA. I came back to LA for parts of the next round of the Clippers playoff run. I stayed on that. I wrote a magazine story, kind of recapping everything. And then I think I filed that magazine story, and then I flew to Miami and jumped onto the finals. It was like Miami and San Antonio. And it was like, I picked it up game 3 or game 4 or something. And it was weird. Like, I started in the first round. I went into Sterling land for a month and a half. And then I went into the finals and did all that. It was like a weird, like, this can't, like, you just can't make this stuff up. It just can't at every turn, it got weird. I mean, to the part where when he sells the team, when Shelley Sterling sells the team, it's because she had 2 neurologists evaluate him and get him declared mentally incapacitated. What? Yeah. Like, I don't know how that, like, I couldn't believe that when it happened. And so, all the people at ESPN like wanted me to stay on it, whether it was like Connor Shell back then, he was the editor, the main editor, Skipper back then, all those guys, they wanted us to lead on that story because it was such a shocking, wild story.
Yeah. What was your relationship with Kobe Bryant?
Oh, like we had such a great relationship towards the end of his career, not the whole time, like the last 4 or 5 years. That was like kind of when I was on my way up and he was in the last few years of his career. But
and how did that happen? Because you would think at the end of his career, he already has the people that he speaks to, the reporters and media that he's comfortable with.
Yeah. Kobe was this guy that he just like, I asked him once, I go, so why did you decide to trust me or talk to me or tell me stuff? I was writing a big story on him, and he goes, I go, was it because I'm a woman? Like, did you feel like a woman in a man's world or something? You just thought like you respected that? Or he goes, to be honest, I don't even think of you as a woman. Like, he's like, I just think you're really good at your job and you care about your job. And I could see how much passion you have for it. And I was like, oh, it's cool. Thanks, dude. Like, that was a really nice statement because like he understood our world. He understood the narrative game. I mean, like his last few years, he would write me and he was like, what do you think of the Player Should Be in story I wrote? I was like, oh, it was good. I was like, whatever, it's good. And he'd go, no, what do you think? Like, give me edits. Tell me what you really think. Like he was already transitioning. And so I think he understood the media game. He understood that world. And he had different media people over the years that he was close to. Like, that's why when he retired, like so many people came out with stories of like, they had so many Kobe stories. Cause I think he was a storyteller, like he understood what we did. He liked to know how I went about writing. He liked to know my process. He wanted to know all the details. He was curious. Does that make sense? Like and I think he was pivoting into his own world. And like, I talked to him about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. I talked to him about, all this stuff. And it was like, like he wanted to know about writing. He wanted to know about storytelling. And I think it was because he was already planning his exit. I think he was planning how he was going to transition into his next career. And so like we were interesting to him, like storytellers were interesting to him. He was not as interested in us as we were in him, but clearly like he wanted to understand how we saw the world and how we told stories and did things. And so, I just think like that's probably why in the last few years, I was one of his main people because that he talked to and was in this circle of I don't know what to call it, circle of trust. That's a weird thing. It's more like we had a constant dialogue all the time. And the thing that I loved about Kobe is that like he was not thin-skinned. Like if I had to write a column saying he sucked, or if we had to bring stuff up, like you didn't hear about it. He didn't whine to you. Like he knew. He would always say to me, there's nothing anybody could say or write about me that I haven't heard before. He didn't care. Like he knew if he sucked, you didn't need to, and he didn't yell at you afterwards. Like he was just like OG that way. Like this is the game. This is what happens when you lose. You get written about. People don't want to, their team sucked the last few years. We wrote a lot of bad stories that a lot of like current players wouldn't have the stomach for.
Yeah. How was he able to rebuild his image so well? From the sexual assault charge in 2003, or even let me ask this too: would that be possible today for an athlete in 2024 with social media being what it is? Would it be possible for an athlete today to get arrested for sexual assault and then rebuild their reputation the way Kobe did?
I don't think so. First of all, I think it would have been very different in the beginning. He played like he never stopped playing.
Yeah.
They were flying him on the plane, back and forth from the courtroom to the games. I don't think that would happen today.
Yeah.
I just don't. Do I think that he could have rehabbed his image? It's not a better question. It's an interesting question. I don't know. I do think he did one thing that was really important. When they settled that civil case, he settled it, and he also really apologized to the woman involved.
Yeah.
Go back and read that. It's a pretty, like he said, I think none of us know what really happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he really, like as much as he could, I think legally, I really think he tried to own that.
Yeah.
In what he wrote there. But I don't know that he could have rebuilt his image in this era like he did before. I just think it's a different era. We had a much different approach to, it was before Me Too. It was before all this stuff. I think the beginning part would have been so much different that I don't even know how to answer the next part. But I do think he did own it in however he could legally, as far as he could go legally in that apology. And that's more than you can say for a lot of people who are accused of things like this.
Yeah. I know you have to run. So the
Sure.
last thing I'll just ask is
It's
what are you
okay.
moving forward?
I had my husband go pick him up because I
Oh,
was like, we're
okay.
gonna be late. It's okay. I was like, I could feel it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Well,
right.
I was like a couple minutes late joining you. So,
So then
yeah.
let me ask this. The day that Kobe died, where
Oh,
were you when you found that out?
I was home. I just landed back from, I was working on a story in Miami for a few days and I just landed back late the night before. It was in January. And, I remember my husband was out because my brother had just had a kid and he wanted to go over there and help a little bit with the little baby. And so it was just me and my son. And I had the nanny over because I had just gotten home the night before and I needed, and I felt like I was gonna, I wanted to sleep in or something like that. And I just didn't want to be all on my own. My son was like, I want to say he was like 18 months maybe. So I needed some help that day. And she was there. It was a Saturday morning and she got the alert on her phone. So like I was sleepy. Like I think I landed probably at midnight and it was like maybe 9 o'clock in the morning. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Um and and I was kind of sleepy and I was like, coming off along like a road trip and she saw the note. She saw it on her iPhone. I mean her Apple Watch, the Apple Watch. And she goes, "Do you see this? Are you seeing this?" And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "TMZ is saying Kobe died in a helicopter accident." And I was like, I think I like froze. Like it was so shocking. It was so upsetting and like, but I also had to go into news reporter mode. And I was really glad I had the nanny there that day, right? Because it was a drop everything kind of moment and go call the sheriff's department, call the news desk, call my editor, call anybody that I could think of who could confirm this news. And it was hard calling people who could confirm it because I mean, like quite frankly, like I was worried that those people might have been on the helicopter with him. I mean, I don't, the people who I would call who are closest to him, you traveled with him.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm leaving a message for somebody who was on the plane. Or the helicopter, right? And that was just like a shaky, I get. And I remember Dave McMenamin called me at that point too, and we both talked about it. He goes, just take a breath, just take a breath. Like it's okay. This is a really shocking human thing. You can be a human for a minute, And I always remember him saying that because we both were like, I mean, and then I live really close to where the crash was. And I live in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, and the crash was out off of Las Virgenes Road. It's like the road you take to go to the beach. And so like maybe 15, 20 minutes from me. And I knew I would be the closest reporter. And I called the news desk and I said, listen, I'm not getting through the sheriff's department. I've left 7 messages. I'm sure they'll call me. I'll keep calling, but I should drive out there. And they said, yeah, how fast can you be there? And then we'll send a crew. And so I was like, oh, I don't know. Let me take I was like, you can't even talk. Like, yeah. I'm going to take a really fast shower. I'll just stick my head out the window to dry. I'll put on some clothes and do my makeup in the car and like go. And I just like got in the car. I was probably in the car within 5 or 10 minutes. I don't think I ate. I don't think I definitely brought my computer. I just grabbed my bag and whatever, but, and my phone charger. And then, like just went out there and I got there so early. Like it was so soon after it happened that I could get really close to where the site was. Like they hadn't really partitioned off. Like I think everybody in LA eventually started driving out there because he was such a huge figure in Los Angeles. And he was, and like I got right up to it. I could see it like from the hillside. I was down the hill
Oh, wow.
from where the crash was. And it was, oh man, like I got calls from like NBA players saying like, because they saw me on SportsCenter, like everybody was watching. I think Joel Embiid called and just like he was like, "Tell me this isn't true." Like, just tell me, like so many people were calling and like cared about him, and people were so upset. Like everybody who saw me on, out there at the scene, and like, and I just said, I think it's true. I see the wreckage, but I don't know that it was him on the plane. They hadn't confirmed it yet. And like just people around were describing the scene and, you do the old school news reporter thing where you like knock on doors of people living nearby and say, did you hear anything? Did you see anything? I found the police who were out there, and I asked any of them, I'm with ESPN, what can you tell me? And I think my producer got there pretty quickly. His name was Ken Field, and he was in Santa Clarita, so he got there pretty quickly too. But I was there for a good like 20, 30 minutes before, and we had a TV crew, and just did like, on scene phone calls into Sports Center, trying to keep my voice from quivering. I definitely think I cried on air a few times that day because it was horrible. And then the one thing I'll never forget, and this is the worst thing ever, is when we went to the sheriff's department for the press conference. And at the time, all we knew was that Kobe was on the plane. We didn't know where he was going or why he was going anywhere. And that's when they said that he was on board with all those kids.
Yeah.
And all those other people. And I was just, that was the word. I still get upset thinking about it, because I didn't, we just didn't know that in the beginning, and we're just thinking it's a singular tragedy, and then you realize how much worse this was. Yeah. And then we figured out they were going to their girls' basketball game, and it was his daughter and their friends, and it was just like, it was just the worst story ever. And I remember, like, I talked to my mom, and what are we going to do? And how to get through it. Like, I was that upset, and she just said, like, listen, Kobe let you know him. He let you know who he was. And your job right now is to cover the story and let people know who he was, and, cover the story, let people know what's going on, but also like who he was, because he didn't let everybody else know that. He didn't let that many people in that far. And so I just kind of had that in my head of like, here's how I'm going to get through this. I'm just going to talk about that. And, I knew him really well. I just seen him like maybe, I don't know, a few months earlier. I'd been out at that Mamba Academy, and he was doing an event there. And, we talked about the Lakers, we talked about the league, anytime somebody would get hurt, he would jump in and text them. And so he was still very connected. And so it was really, it was a really hard story to get through. And then I remember that night I had to write a column, and I went down, and I had to do Good Morning America. So I just stayed at the hotel across the street from our studios, and I just stayed up all night writing. And I think I did not sleep. I just like laid in bed for an hour and then went and did GMA in the morning, and like tried to write some like column to put all of it in perspective. And I'm Candace Parker, and I talked that night. She was really close to him too. Just talking to athletes of his caliber who just kind of wanted to process it too. Everybody was processing it all at once. And it's still, even today, where do you live? Are you in LA?
No, I'm on Long Island, New York.
Okay. You drive around LA, like none of those murals came down. I mean, not the ones I still drive by them all the time. Like, it's amazing. Usually people paint the murals of somebody. And then, a few months later they paint over it. It's just now, it's just still Kobe murals everywhere. I was at the Dolby Theater for an event, and I still see there's a statue there, and they get the photos. It's like become he's got a wax museum statue. Like, it's just, he's still all over LA.
What was it like for you at that time as a journalist and as a friend of Kobe's? We talked earlier about like the rush to break news in that situation, to watch the news industry hastily report information about what happened at that time.
It actually was not that hard for me to like North Star this. Like, the North Star is like, you better be freaking right. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to break this. This is awful. TMZ already has this. Let's make sure we're right. Let's not say anything that we don't know is true. Let's not speculate. Eyewitness stuff, that's fine. This person heard the helicopter. This guy who was at church, that stuff's fine. But like, I feel like Adrian actually confirmed it. I think he got it confirmed. And it was, I'm trying to remember how. It was somebody with somebody who was told directly, who was told officially and directly that he had passed in the helicopter crash. I think, the team was flying back on a plane, and they were all told, and people around the league were told, by I forget who was telling people. I can't remember, but it was all done as respectfully as they could, because Vanessa was his wife, and this is her news to tell people. And there were some people who helped out in covering that, because I remember it was just such a massive thing for the Lakers. Like, I think there was the Lakers really helped her through that. If I,
Yeah.
Rob Pelinka obviously was very close to Kobe and Vanessa. I think Jeannie Buss and everybody with the Lakers was like very close to her. And so they made sure she didn't have to handle all that herself. Like they, everybody handled there was league stuff that had to happen. There was games going on. I think they postponed that game, remember?
Yeah.
The Lakers had a crisis meeting the next day and they shut down the facility. And it was, there was like so much news in and around it. And yet I just felt like the North Star is like, this is not about the details. You go with official sources right now. You don't speculate. You don't guess. We're not going to be wrong about anything here. Like, I'm not worried that TMZ had this first. This is a human being.
How does covering LeBron compare with Kobe? Because I would imagine Kobe is a much bigger star locally in Los Angeles, LeBron a bigger star globally.
I don't even know. I don't actually think I agree with that. I think Kobe was a bigger star in both places.
Really?
I think Kobe was he was just worldwide. I remember going to China for the Olympics in 2008 and it was like, I'd get in a cab and the driver didn't speak English. And, I was trying to tell him like, go to the bird's nest and he didn't know that, but I would like point on a map where to go. And then we would I was trying to say I was from Los Angeles and there was like, no, I don't understand. And then I would say Kobe Bryant. And he was like, oh, Kobe. Like, because people don't realize that like Kobe went overseas. He went to Asia. He went to Turkey. He went all over to the Philippines. Like he went before that became a huge deal for NBA players to do that, And I think he was more worldwide early. I mean, you just look at all the murals. There's murals everywhere, all over the world, Brazil, Philippines. Like there's just there's a guy who keeps track of all the murals everywhere. LeBron's big. Yeah, of course he's big. He's the greatest, all-time scorer. He's 1A, 1B with Michael Jordan, his greatest player of all time. LeBron, how would I put this? Kobe was definitely a bigger story locally. LeBron definitely nationally because he's been in 3 different places. And he's been the defining player of the last 20 years. Like he's just everything about the NBA has been about LeBron James and he's interesting and he's smart and he's outstanding. And now he's got this whole like last act that is lasting a lot longer than anyone ever could conceive of a guy doing. I mean, he's got this Tom Brady like longevity. He's still really freaking good as we just saw in the Olympics. Right. And so but I would say LeBron feels more like a movie star or a celebrity to cover.
Yeah.
He's not like Kobe was with Kobe would call me when I was or text me while I was on the radio talking about them, and he was like ingrained in the day-to-day of it. He was, he was so enmeshed, and he handled his own stuff. Like he had an agent, Rob Pelinka, he had an assistant and stuff, but he just dealt directly with people all the time. And I don't think LeBron does that. LeBron kind of, I would say covering him is covering a rock star or a movie star or something like that. There's a sort of insulation around LeBron that, you can be in the same locker room and he'll talk to you and stuff like that. But he's not as curious about what we do in the whole media game and all that. He kind of stays above it. And so he lets and other people handle that part of the job for him. He's just, in the cryo chamber or whatever. He's working out at 5 a.m. or making a movie or whatever.
Last thing, we talked about Woj working towards something. What are you working towards right now?
Oh, that's a good answer. That's a good question. I mean, you asked me this after I just did my the podcast, which gets made into a scripted series, and I have a lot more ideas.
How'd you like Clipped?
I liked it. I don't know. How'd you like Clipped? Did you like it?
Yeah. I think it exceeded my expectations, actually.
I think the 4 main characters, which is the heart of the story, right? I think they were just incredible actors. I hope they all get nominated for Emmys, right? Whether it's Ed O'Neill as Donald, who was like just amazing. He was so great in that role. I thought Jackie Weaver was great as Shelley, and Cleopatra Coleman as Vistaviano, Lawrence Fishburne as Doc Rivers. I thought those guys were great. And those performances, the writing was so strong. There's a part of me that wanted it to be longer and get more inside the locker room, give the players, more of an arc. Does that make sense? Could we have done 10 episodes? Probably. Could I have done more?
Yeah.
and, cause it wasn't built like Winning Time was, which was going to be a serial, that was season 1, season 2, season 3. This is a limited series talking about a moment in time. But so I have more ideas like that. I have stuff that I can't say too much, right? Wink, wink, that I've been developing, talking with our 30 for 30 people about. And hopefully we have a few more of those kinds of stories to tell. I think for me, and I still like what I do. I like the stories and the people in the NBA. It's an interesting, like Jackie McMullen was always like my greatest mentor, right? She just retired a few years ago. If I could be like, I'm 45 now, and if I could have 10, 15 more years and walk away at 60, like Jackie did, that'd be great. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, Jackie wrote books, and one of her books was made into, a play or an opera or something, right? Like Magic and Larry. And so I just think there's so many rich stories that I've told at ESPN, that I think could make rich stories beyond just the telling in real time, whether it's a podcast or a scripted series or a documentary. And I know ESPN is figuring out that next landscape as well. So I think the NBA is just, that's the kind of stuff that, games and news and the daily grind, that's our bedrock. Like you gotta do your day. That's our job, right?
Yeah.
Like you've got to excel in that. And right now in the short term, my head's down. I'm doing that. Like I'm doing that. I don't have any bandwidth for anything else right now.
Sure.
I can be, as Woj used to say to me, he's like, you can be great at having a family and great at your job, but you probably can't also be great at having a active social life. Like you probably got to pick 2 or 3.
Yeah.
A lot of people, like he wouldn't like on the road. He's like, I don't know how people go out and have drinks after games and stuff. I'm working. I don't have time for that. I don't have time to fraternize with my, like whatever. And I totally know what he means. Like if I want to be great at my job and great as a mom, and, I have 2 little boys, right? Like those are what I got to do. And the one thing I will say, in my 40s, I have definitely tried to be much better about taking care of myself. Getting, working out more, being healthier, eating better. Like I'm always doing like these challenges where I don't eat any processed foods and stuff. And I go to my trainer all the time. And I find that it's like you got to put energy in. Like you're tired. The sleep is only finite. You're not going to sleep more when you have little kids, as you know.
Right. Yes. I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old.
Oh yeah. You're in it. You get it. And so like, you're constantly like just fighting a losing battle with the sleep and the wellness and all that.
Yeah.
But what you can do is like anything, like you can't sleep more. So you should just put more into taking care of yourself, whether it's like working out or training or whatever. And also like you can still answer the phone while you're at the gym. Right. Like, whereas when you're sleeping, you got to turn your phone off. Right. So that's like a big thing that I'm trying to do better, is like, I just like, if you're a healthier person, you will be better at everything that you do in your life. And so, I think that's a goal for all of us, right? As we move into this, like, and that's what Woj is doing. Like he's going to, he might actually sleep 4 hours a night. He might actually maybe he'll get 6, like he's going to enjoy his life. He deserves it. And this is if I have 2 hopes for him. 1, the Hall of Fame calls him this year, and 2, go and let me see that book in a couple of years. Let me see that book or 2, or come back with a fire breathing column or something, just because I know he'd be great at it.
Ramona, you were great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks for rolling with me as I'm finding my things. I hope I didn't mess up your kid time here.
No, we're all good.
Yeah, I know you had stuff too. I know the juggle.
Yeah, no worries.
I was texting my husband, go get him. I'm not going to be able to pick him up. I got it. I get it.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Have a good one.
You too. That is Ramona Shelburne. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.